Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Restaurant Within. This is a podcast that has everything to do with things that go on inside of a restaurant. And I spent over 30 years in restaurants around the Southeast, and I have been in multi unit management all the way down to I got hired in as a server back in the 90s. And I just wanted to start a podcast to help to share some of the things that I learned, and hopefully it will help people to make good decisions on whether or not maybe the business is for them, or maybe even ways for them to make a better living than they're making now. Restaurant industry can be spectacular, but you definitely need to know a lot about it. And hopefully I can help you get a step ahead, or at least give you some things to think about. This is not intended to be advice, but more so a diary of events to an extent of what I've learned. But right now, the only full episodes that we have are going to be on YouTube. The rest of the stuff I'm putting on TikTok and Instagram, stuff like that, are all just shorts. If you want to see the full episodes, subscribe on YouTube, and hopefully we can make a regular show out of it. I'm going to try to post at least once or twice a week and see how it goes. Hopefully there's some usefulness in the videos. And more importantly, I just hope to document where I guess I landed in the career and the things that we face now, and maybe give people food for thought for how to proceed in the future. But today's episode is about being a hostess. Nothing to being a hostess, right? That should be easy stuff. Just stand up at the front of the restaurant and tell people where to go. It's a little bit more complicated than that. First of all, there's three positions for the type of restaurants that I've ran. There's in high volume, you can have one person in the front of the restaurant that is just taking names and issuing information to guests that are coming into the door. And they usually would give you information about the wait time and take down your name and things of that nature. And then there's usually another person that is also steadily planning for which tables are getting up, which servers can take another table, and the timing of how tables are going to go back in the dining room. And those two roles, needless to say, they intermix, because the person taking names has to be on track with the person that's seating tables. Because when you give that time, if you miss that time, that's going to land on everybody that has to seat that table, the servers, the managers. So you don't want to miss. You want to be able to quote an accurate time that's reliable. And honestly, in my experience, sometimes it's better to overdo it a little bit. You better to overdo it than undo it, because if you give somebody a 10-minute quote time and you try to see them in 15 or 20 minutes, you're almost always going to hear stuff you don't want to hear. But it happens, and that's just a misalignment when it does happen like that. But whenever you seat a guest, then you've got one person that's steadily up there, especially if you've got a lot of tables in your restaurant. It takes one person's full-time job in high volume to do the planning for who's going to leave and who's to be sat next. And then there could be multiple people that are actually taking people back to the tables. And that's usually a newer type role, a younger person, or whatever you want to call it, the least experienced of the group. That's where I've always brought people into the job. And it really pays for that person to have some patience and be well-spoken and courteous and have a smile. Because they, in the front part of the meal, probably spend more time with that guest than even the first two people do. But those three positions, they sound like they're nothing. They sound like anybody could do them. At the same time, they have to be in sync with the restaurant. Tables turn based off of how fast the servers can move and how fast the kitchen can produce food. A server's workload directly determines their efficiency, their level of experience, their sense of urgency. All of that stuff matters as far as how many tables they can turn. And if you're a really good host and you're in the front of a restaurant, you typically know which servers can handle a lot, which servers can't handle as much. And you typically know when tables are about to leave. You typically know when a server is about ready to take on another table, or whether or not they are. You can watch, and it's funny how intimate that kind of position gets, because when you're in the front of a restaurant, especially if you're really good at it, and I've known several that were really good at it, they can literally look across the restaurant and look at the eyes of every server in that dining room and tell you whether or not they are comfortable and happy and in sync and doing things the right way at the moment, or whether they're behind or frantic, or even worse, they have a manager on hand because something's gone wrong. And as the person who's planning out the tables that has to try to keep up with the quote times from the person that greeted you at the front door, any unexpected surprises, whether it's a guest complaint, delayed food, spilled drink, there's lots of things that can slow down a table turn. And that directly affects whether or not they're able to make that time that they quoted you at the front door. But a really good person in that driver's seat that's planning out the dining rooms at high volume in mass quantities is usually a really good communicator. They have a really good kind of sixth sense for keeping their head on a swivel and being able to know where the servers are, where the managers are. And you typically know if you've got a really good manager on duty, if everything's under control. In my world, I keep a manager up around the lobby if at all possible, mainly because when you're on a wait, you just don't know what kind of damage that's doing. You don't know what guests are going to be patient enough to be able to stand a wait. And you want to try, if you do have to go on a wait, you want to try to minimize any sales loss that you might have. So you want to try to make sure that if you're in the lobby as a manager, you know the number of names that you've called that didn't stay in the lobby or people who didn't want to wait. And sometimes you can speed things up just a little bit to circumvent some losses, but you want to try not to lose people in the lobby if at all possible. But the only way to know that is if you're in the lobby, because the hosts, like I said, they have their hands full. One of them's taking names, one of them's seating tables, the others are taking tables actually back to the dining room. And it's amazing the skill set that comes from that front door and what they can do in terms of making somebody feel good and making guests feel like they're in a controlled environment before they ever get back to wherever they're going to seat and they meet the server that's going to wait on them. A front door that's moving too fast, too cold, too far away, too distant, not talking enough, any of that stuff is going to set a server up for what they may not see coming as a tense guest. And some servers are really good at offsetting that. Some servers know how to recover when a guest has been put in an uncomfortable situation. But most servers just start off a meal like normal, doing what they do. And so if somebody has gotten irritated with us before we ever get them to the table, oftentimes that can trip a server up because the server's just going through 100 motions a minute trying to keep up in the dining room. They may not see that a guest has already been triggered or already been tested. A really good seater would know to tell the server, and a manager would know to tell a server. If anything has happened that had put this guest on edge, they'll let the server know so the server can slow down and do the things necessary to recover that guest from that position. But I would just say that all three of those jobs are not the easiest jobs in the world. But when people come in the restaurant, a lot of the things that restaurateurs forget about employees too. And it's easy when you're dealing with thousands of people every week to just forget, but everybody that comes in a restaurant, they're hungry. And so people are not necessarily the nicest they're going to be when they're hungry. And so that front door being a good cushion, having a sense of urgency, looking like they're paying attention. If you've got a front door and you go up there and they put you on a wait, and the next thing you know, they've got their cell phone out texting somebody, it surely doesn't make you feel like they're trying to hurry up and get you to a table. And that becomes an issue because people feel like it's disrespectful to their time and that we're not doing all the things that we can do to try to get them underway with their meal. So I would just say the front door employment piece starts when the managers are doing background checks and interviewing people. You really need character in that person. You need a personality, and you need somebody who's hospitable and somebody who's good at making people feel at ease. You don't want somebody who's a comedian. You don't want somebody who has got too serious of a look or too standoffish. You want somebody who can definitely put people at ease. And to do that, you got to be able to tell the truth. If you know the wait's 15 minutes, you got to say 15 minutes. No, it's going to be an hour. It's going to be an hour. The idea at the front door is not necessarily to try to even get everybody in the door. The idea at the front door is to operate with as high integrity as you can and let people know what they're up against. And guests can make a decision on whether or not they'd like to stay there. There are some of these cities, especially where you have these big colleges, college games, stuff like that, waits can sometimes get 2-3 hours long. In a normal environment, people wouldn't wait that long, but in some environments, they really don't have any choice. So I would just say those hostesses, how they interview, their energy, how much of a character they have when they do the interview, how well spoken they are, how they present themselves, all matters as far as having a good hostess. But at the same time, every restaurant is put into a situation where they have to hire the best they can on what they've got. And so a lot of that gets set by the environment, by the temperament of that management team, how hospitable that management team can operate. The number one fault that I see in managers throughout my career is when they allow all of the elements of the restaurant to get to them until they get to be short, or they speak to their team the wrong way, or they get impatient. Definitely some of the big mistakes that I made early I think anybody that worked with me the first 10 years that I was in the restaurant business would probably tell you I was pretty hostile. And you grow out of that. But I think that what happens is you know how to do a lot, but you don't know how to do everything. And whenever things start coming at a million miles an hour, especially when you're really high volume, I think you tend to try to be the best that you can. And you're not certain that any of the results that you get are really ideal. And as time goes on, you learn to handle all things that come at you in the best way possible for everybody involved. But there are a lot of assumptions made. Guests come in the restaurant, and how that manager presents themselves says a lot about that restaurant. How that manager deals with the staff says a lot about that restaurant. And it certainly directly impacts how the staff in that restaurant behaves. So I would just say it comes down to, in both cases, the people that we hire, the amount that they know how to confidently and comfortably do all of the things that come with their job so that people can come in and enjoy it. But they do get under pressure because there is an assumption by guests that, a lot of times that the manager's not necessarily on their side. If things aren't going really well, guests tend to think the managers are not on their side. And maybe even the staff too at times. And unfortunately for the managers, the staff can often think the same thing. Sometimes they don't think the manager's on their side. If that manager's not hospitable, if they don't good at servant leadership, if they're not good at being a great support person, then it's going to shine through in a restaurant. When I was coming up, they said, if you're not serving a guest, you need to be serving somebody who is. And that's always been that way. Over the last several years, I've heard the servant leadership term a lot more than I ever had in my career. I think that is a priceless way to deal with people as well. I've been very fortunate in all the people that I've ever worked for, and I've always been treated really well. And it always motivated me to go out and perform more than I probably would ordinarily. I don't always think about work as work because I have a passion for it. I love the teaching. I love coaching. I love the result whenever you get done with a meal and somebody says, wow, that was awesome. Or, man, my day was terrible before y'all did that. That was awesome, and I appreciate it. The host area is the front part of that. A great host department can disarm guests before they get to a table and absolutely give servers the best opportunity to hit a grand slam. Because for me, it's not about survival every day. I'm not really interested in going in and just trying to survive a shift. I'm interested in going into a shift, and my goal is to have every single soul that comes into that shift say, wow, that was awesome. And I think that the path and the art to the hospitality business is of such that if you're not on the mission to find that formula, then I would challenge what it is that you do. And I know that the business has changed a lot in my lifetime. A lot of people can be in the business for the wrong reasons, but I would just say you're not going to get necessarily rich in the restaurant business unless you own one. And I can't speak to that because I never owned one, but it can be a wonderful career. It can be a lot of fun, but you have to handle things the right way. You have to have a great attitude. You have to be able to have fun in the business. And I don't care if it's an owner, a manager, or a staff member, or guest. If it takes the air out of the room from being able to have fun while you're there, everybody in the building is going to feel that. And it's one thing whenever you don't execute as a restaurant and you make somebody react poorly. In a well-worn restaurant, you know how to apologize and you know how to make things right. I would just say that's a big part. We're never going to be perfect. Restaurants have too many moving pieces, even with small menus and smaller crews. You get it Friday, Saturday night, or in really high volume, there's a lot going on. And if you've done the heavy lifting prior to, and I've said it my whole life, that anything that goes wrong for dinner, all the things that you could have done to make that dinner go well, happened before 5 p.m. The people you hired, the food you got ready, the things you had to do up in the dining room, everything that was going to set you up to be successful was going to be done before 5 p.m. And you either did those things or you didn't. I would say a huge chunk of our industry gets caught up in trying to wrestle with, what do I do now? And I would say there's a lot of expertise built into what to do now once things have gone the wrong way. I would say the first 10 years of your career, you learn all the things to do now once things have gone the wrong way. But I would say after that, and maybe you're lucky, maybe you picked it up faster than I did in a lot of ways, but there's a point in your career where you learn not to let it get into the weeds to start with. And a lot of that has to do with how many people you've got on, how much food you had prepped, how prepared were we to go into this shift. And for those of you who aren't in the restaurant industry, when I say we're in the weeds, that means we've got more to do than we probably need to have. When you get in that situation, your odds of success go down dramatically. Anyways, that's about my limit for time on this episode. I appreciate you all watching. Looking forward to doing the next episode. Our full episodes right now are only on YouTube. Please take time to forward or subscribe to this and forward it to anybody else that you think might be in the restaurant industry. This is only episode 2, and we'll be going through many other things. We appreciate it. I look forward to the next episode. Feel free to email me at therestaurantwithin@gmail.com. I'd love to have any feedback you have on the audio visual. We're definitely still practicing and getting better day by day. So hopefully this will get better as we go. But I appreciate y'all's time, and we'll see y'all in the next episode.